Hey Frank, thanks for joining. Today we'll talk a little bit about scoring APIs. So we've all seen that APIs have seen quite an uptick in terms of how important they are for AI. And you've been working on scoring APIs specifically also with AI in mind. What have you seen and why do you think that's relevant?
Um, so what we've seen is like generally there's a lot of blind spots that people don't think about. So when you're delivering APIs for humans, humans are quite forgiving. So they will do their best to work around an API in a manner that's safe or go out of band to try and make sure that they can get the value of the API ingested into their system. So we've seen some interesting things, and we want to move much beyond linting. You know, linting has been around for a while. It's great. It's useful. It's kind of shouty, but you want to get a feeling for what you're doing well and where you need to improve, especially if it's agents that are going to be consuming the APIs.
What you are cooking up so far um, has some linting in it, but it also has some other things in it. I find that really interesting. It's kind of a little bit going beyond just linting, so to speak. And you've identified 6 different dimensions that you're looking at. If we could just very briefly walk through them, just so that people get an idea of the kind of information that you think is relevant and that your tooling then will look for.
Sure. Number one, yeah. So the first thing we look for is foundational compliance. So ultimately, that is, is the API structurally healthy and is it compliant with the standard that it's advertising? For example, OpenAPI 3.1.0 as an example. So the things that we look for are like spec validity. So is it valid according to that? We then look for resolution completeness. So can we resolve successfully all of the references that might be in the document? We then use some of the best linters that are out there, Spectral and Redoctly, to use their core rule sets plus our own opinionated rule set on that foundational compliance dimension. And then we also look for structural integrity issues. So have you not configured schemas that are a little bit strange and will cause you a lot of problems as you actually try to roll those out to consumers? So that's number one, foundational compliance.
So that's kind of a general health check, so to speak. And then you start caring a little bit more about the users of Open API descriptions, I would say. So number
Exactly.
two,
So the next number two is developer experience. So that's like what makes an API enjoyable to consume from a human developer perspective. And we also have a little bit of a kind of tooling readiness from our own perspective here. Is this API going to work well with our tools? So things that we look for in that dimension are example density. So are we taking advantage of embedding examples into all the places that support examples within OpenAPI? Are those examples then valid according to the schemas or the parts of the document that you're embedding those examples into? And we then look at the documentation. So have you summaries and descriptions there? What kind of ratios of that exist and how clear? So from kind of a linguistic kind of clarity perspective, how clear are those based to the intent of what you're trying to actually do? And then we also look at response coverage and we look at that from a happy path as well as a non-happy path. So for those responses, have you at least described what the user should expect when things go well, but also what they should expect when things do not go so well?
so that's really relevant for the humans using the Open API. And now we get into the more interesting, or I would say more special bits that you don't really see that much these days, where it's more about the AI readiness of the whole thing. So what's your next dimension that you work with?
Yeah, so the third dimension is indeed AI readiness and combined with agent experience. So, what makes an API good and ready for an agent or an AI based system to be able to consume? So, we kind of look at the semantic interpretability there and then making sure that you are very clear from an intent perspective. So, again, we look at places where you can embed rich, let's say, text that LLMs and AI agents can actually consume. So we look again at descriptions and summaries. We also look at kind of types specificity. So, are you actually describing the schemas in the right way? So are you taking advantage of all of the affordances that you have in JSON schema? So if you describe that this is a date, are you actually specifying the date format there? If you're describing that this thing is like a true or false or binary type of property, are you actually using a Boolean rather than a string? Are you setting the boundaries, etc., for what's to be expected? We then look at things like the existence of policies. So are there rate limits described? Are there SLAs described? Are there other types of headers or metadata there that the agent should be aware of, so it doesn't like try to burst call the API? And then one which I think will be near and dear to your heart, Erik, because we also look at error standardization. So are errors described using RFC 9457 or at least 7807 to make sure that there's a high quality semantic understanding of what to do and what the shape of those errors will be. And the very last thing we look at is kind of the operation ID quality. So our operations ID there, are they everywhere they are supposed to be across all operations, and are they also like properly distinct?
Okay, so that's the agent experience, and then you have another category, the next one, which is I think agent usability.
Yeah, it's more about how safe is this API for let's say an agent to be actually able to consume it on its own and not cause any like nasty surprises for the system. So things that can kind of trip up an agent are generally the complexity or the overall complexity of the API. So we look at things like complexity comfort. So the sheer size of the API, endpoint density, schema complexity, and then the more complex it is, then the more you're kind of penalized there from a scoring perspective, because it's just going to be harder for an agent to be able to process what's going on. We then look for things like distinctiveness. So do you have operations, or do you have different endpoints that are very, very close to each other, so they do similar things? And again, that might trip up an agent with regards to which is the right one to call. We then look at things like navigation. So are you using pagination for like collection or plural resource get operations? Do you put in hypermedia affordances into the API as well? How are you doing from an intent, let's say an intent legibility perspective? So what you describe within a particular operation, is that using the expected like verb, HTTP verb, for example? So you're describing that you're going to create something, but then you're using a get operation or a delete operation. That's going to be a little bit confusing. And then we look at other safety things like item potency, and again, just looking at kind of making sure that operations are safe to consume. And then if there's anything in there that can help kind of function calling or tool calling, then that will also help the agent use the API.
In my mind, the difference there is a little bit the agent experience talks about the quality of the description, and the agent usability talks more about the quality of the definition, so to speak. Is your AI well designed to be used by agents? Would that be kind of a
I think that's a
yes?
fair assumption. Yeah.
Okay. Good. That sounds really good. And now these are kind of the AI specific things. I would say no, there's one more. But in between, I think we have one other thing. So you also have one that looks at security, which always sounds like a good idea with APIs, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like there's only a certain amount of the security validation that you can do from actually just looking at the static API document itself. But just making sure that auth is used in the right places, looking for sensitive operations, and making sure that they are actually covered by auth if auth is described within the document itself. We're then looking at the servers that are described and the transport security that's used there. So obviously we're hoping that it's going to be HTTPS, especially if the intent is that this is a public facing API. Looking for secret hygiene, making sure there's nothing that's hard coded in there that might be an afterthought. And then looking at how kind of privacy is handled as well for any PII data. And then, of course, we take advantage of other things that are out there, like the OWASP top 10 rule sets. And we, again, use the linters to come in and give us some feedback, and then try and make sense of all of that kind of good security posture in order to formulate the score.
And then the last one, I find the last one almost the most interesting one, because I think what we see now is that more and more people are definitely using APIs with AI, and we see more and more kind of scalability issues showing up, right? Like people have too many tools. They started with the MCP, but now they realize that there's only so much they can stuff into one application, and then they get really confused because the context gets way too big. So a lot of things, I think, are hinting in the direction that we probably need to get better at searching and selecting the right tools for the jobs that we try to do. So your last dimension then goes into that. And the last dimension is?
It is AI discoverability. Drum roll. Yeah, so I think this is an incredibly interesting area that we're focusing on, especially in some of the things that we're building, because as you mentioned, tool sprawl and bloat is really hindering the AI experiences as we're trying to expose our enterprise capabilities to agents in a way that actually makes sense and they can be found, and we're using the right thing for the right job. So we're really kind of looking at this from a semantic perspective, but also kind of from a heuristic manner when it comes to how we're going to really have APIs that will be easy to understand the intent of them, and then matching the context, making sure that we can surface and search for and find these things. So again, descriptive richness comes into this, how clearly things are described. Do what's described actually match the intent? So if you look at kind of the shape of the operations and the schemas, do they align with actually what's described for this particular operation to do? So there's a certain amount of kind of, let's say, finesse to how that is actually evaluated. Then we think about the intent phrasing. So again, are the verbs that are used expected based on the intent that is described in the summaries or the descriptions? Is there anything in those summaries or descriptions that would hat tip to a particular workflow or a particular sequence that you can chain the particular operations together? Of course, if you're then using signals like you're mentioning that Arazzo is also part of the ability to be able to discover and use this API, that also helps. And then we also look for things like registries. So if you have described or linked or referenced to an APIs.json file or an MCP registry or an LLMs.txt document that can be pulled in to understand better context and better intent, that will also help from a discoverability perspective. And then we look at how you kind of organize the different endpoints also from a tagging point of view. And this is becoming more relevant with OpenAPI 3.2 as well when it comes to a tagging perspective. And are you doing that in a logical way that can actually help organize and make sense of a whole raft of operations that might be part of a single OpenAPI document?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've seen some early versions. I think it looks very promising. I think it has kind of better coverage than the things we've seen so far. We'll show a sample scorecard, I think, somewhere here. We'll just show something that people get some impression. So what are your plans? Like, when do you think first versions will become available so that people can actually play around with it, at least for, it's like checking out what it tells them in terms of how good their APIs are?
Yeah, so first versions, at least covering the first 3 of the 6 dimensions, will be out in November. And then we'll be hoping to get all dimensions supported in around the time of API Days Paris, and then looking to support bulk reviews and bulk scores across your API estate early into the new year.
Yeah, I think that'll get really interesting, when I can kind of point that tool at my API landscape and get like an overview of how ready are my APIs in general, right? What are the outliers? Where should I invest? Where should I fix things because they're particularly not so user or agent friendly? Great. So thanks, Frank, for joining, and thanks for walking us through kind of an early preview of that model.
Thanks, Erik.
And thanks, everybody, for watching. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing. And for more news around this, you can, of course, follow Frank or this channel. We'll make sure that we post updates as soon as they become available. Like Frank said, early versions should be around very, very soon in November and December. That was it for today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.